let's get started. And anyone else who pops in, they'll be able to follow along. But this is a different sort of format of webinar than any we've run before, and maybe different from any that you've attended previously. This is really just an open-ended, ask me anything about Hut's Q&A, and I'll do my absolute best to field the questions. And I'm sure any question that you have, it's likely that someone else also has it. So I don't think that there's any question too small or too strange or whatever you might be thinking about. And this is also for us that it's important to us to be able to accurately articulate and convey everything that it is that we do, because we're in sort of a sticky business with some complexity. And the more we can hear the parts of what we do that aren't coming across clearly from our audience and prospective clients, the better. So let me just stop there, open it up, and go ahead, fire off questions here in the Q&A, and I'll answer them as long as they funnel in. That's a great question. So Anonymous asks, since you're a one-stop shop, what happens if you have a designer or an interior decorator? Anonymous, do you mean a interior designer? I'm gonna assume you do. In that case, we play ball quite well. So when we get into interior finishes and fixtures procurement, if you have an existing designer, and we also have a whole contingent of clients that are designers themselves, what we tend to do is produce the inventory of items that need to be selected and sourced and procured to fill out the entirety of the house, along with the takeoffs. So by takeoffs, I mean amount of square footage of tile, amount of square footage of flooring, the number of hi-hat lights, whatever it might be, just a full inventory. And we'll add some guidelines to say, here's the 300, 400 some odd items that need to be selected. Here's some allowances that we'd like the designer to stay within to be able to keep within budget. And here's some sizing tolerances for them. And so as an example, think about like wood tile and wood floor, or tile and wood flooring meeting together. You don't really want to choose a tile that's super thick. It's proud of the wood floor. You're going to end up stubbing your toe for the next 20 years in the house. So we would say, great, you've got 400 square feet of tile that you need for this location. It needs to be 3/8 inch tile. You have $8 a square foot to spend on it. And so that's, if we're not making the actual selections, we tend to provide parameters that we can offer to your designer. Joseph asks, do you have to use all your services or do a la carte? Our contracts and our agreements, I always say that they read a lot like dim sum menus. They are sort of designed specifically to be a la carte. There are kind of chunks of work that make sense to do together. So we probably have 15, 16 sort of individual kind of streams of work we can do, but they tend to fall into 5 phases. The first being land sourcing, finding the right piece of land. The second is pre-construction, so site planning and groundwork and getting that lot to a build-ready state. The third is on design modifications and interior finishes and fixtures, so getting to the design and initial pricing on the house. The fourth is on documentation, permit documentation, construction documentation, all the materials you need to be able to onboard a builder, get kind of legal approvals and cut the red tape to be able to build the house, and get financing. And then the last is on assembling the build team and operating as your owner's rep during construction. So while we could do any combination of things, it tends to be that we take on those chunks at any given time. And it's quite typical for us to say, hey, we'll find you a piece of land and we'll go through and kind of prepare and organize that piece of land, but we'll hold off on the design of the house until later. And so, Joe, hopefully that answers your question. Lynn asks, do you work with folks that want to act as the home builder? Do you mean actually swinging a hammer and building the house yourself, or do you mean operating as the general contractor and managing the framing guys and the plumbers and electricians and subs? Okay, so you both want to build the house and manage and operate. You want to swing hammers and be the general contractor. We don't do a lot of it. I mean, we're not against it. I think that we have had some folks that have taken on decent amounts of self-building because they had done previous renovations. Like they weren't concrete folks. They needed to subcontract out their foundations and some of their framing, but once it got into the inside, they felt quite comfortable dealing with cabinets and tile and other things. There are certain parts of once we kind of hand over our documentation, we'd be looking for releases if you are not a licensed contractor to say, hey, there's kind of a hold harmless. These are your materials now. You're responsible for what's going to happen next. But we're not against that at all. I actually like the kind of gumption of somebody taking this on, and I like the idea that folks are out there ready to both save on some of the general contractor profit and overhead and save on their costs, but also looking to take a very active role in the creation of their own home. So, is it Lynn or Linny? Linny, let's chat about what you have in mind. I think it sounds really interesting. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, particularly if Linny said my husband was a home builder for years, but in a different market. Perfect. I think that we do come across that sometimes, and we just make sure we understand what materials we're handing off on the documentation side to make it quite clear what the assemblies are and what the production method is. And it's also great to be able to speak with the home builder who is also the owner in real time so that they understand the what is going to go into the implementation of the project. And if you're in a market that we know quite well, and your husband, for instance, is operating as a GC but doesn't have many subcontractors, we're also up for offering some recommendations there for plumbers, electrical, mechanical, etc., to make as part of your home building team. Okay, let me head back up. I think let's see. I'm just getting used to how this works. So once I answer something, I see. So I choose answer live and then I will answer it. Anonymous asks, how do you find good contractors? So in this case, I am going to refer you to our YouTube channel. We have a whole section within our YouTube channel of how it works videos. They're kind of 30, 45-minute deep dives into subjects like this. And that video will go through a series of steps, but we are generally always looking at contractors and keep an enormous database of all general contractors in our target areas where we understand their availability, their general price points, what their team structure looks like. Are they more paper contractors that are subbing everything out? Do they have build teams in-house? What is their bandwidth in any given year? What's their service area and radii that they work within? And so there are areas of the country where we sort of not only have good partners, but we also have kind of a database structure where we know pretty much every general contractor and we have an opinion on who to use and why for what kind of project and why. And so that's really the starting point, is the depth of our database, and then evaluating and visiting their projects in real time, taking sort of kind of pre-calls with these folks. All of this happening before we even have a client for them, where we're just improving the benefit of, or improving the quality of our database so that we are really looking for folks that feel like a continuation of the very streamlined and organized design process we have, and it feels like there's real continuity into the build side. Then once we get into soliciting interest from contractors, we're looking at how well do they understand our plans? Have they built something similar before, and are they working on it recently? We are evaluating if we haven't worked with them before, speaking with all of their kind of previous clients. We are visiting their build sites to see like how clean and organized they are. We're also looking at their contract format. So we spend a lot of time on this because our contractor network is really an extension of our brand, and also it's in their hands to be able to execute the products that we have in mind. So there's a real quality control concern there for us, along with we're generally and philosophically want to make sure that our clients aren't handing large bank finance checks to people that they hate. And so like, while our design takes over and manages a lot of the like design requirements, and our detailing helps to ensure a lot of the design quality control, just the experience of working with somebody over 6, 9, 12 months and it being a large investment into them, you want to be doing that with someone who's pleasant to work with. And so we care a lot about this culture fit and personality type. So that was a long way of saying we spend a lot of time on this, and that good contractor it's a little bit of a universal idea. Like there's good contractors and bad contractors, but I think maybe more important is thinking about who's a good contractor for the project. And so we spent a lot of time with that matchmaking. Jaspreet asked, typically, how long does it take for a full build process from land acquisition to the point where the home is ready for move in? I would say 12 months is a really good thought here, assuming this sort of organization, like say Jaspreet, we started working tomorrow and you have nothing. You have a dollar and a dream, but an idea to be somewhere. We would spend more or less 3 to 4 months on sourcing land, you going through due diligence and acquisition of that land, assuming there's no major kind of concerns with the land. We'd go through within that period the design, permitting, entitlement of the land, getting our permits in place. We'd run in parallel, uh, organizing the build team around the project. And then the goal at the end of design and permitting and bring on the contractors that three things are happening at once. Your financing is lined up, your permits are in place, and your contractors mobilized and ready to go. And a lot of what we do is about making those kind of three streams of things intersect. And then from there, imagine weather dependent, sort of 7 to 9 month build timeline. Again, these are pretty loose answers depending on size of house, location of house, difficulty of build site. But I think that that's a good rule of thumb to think about, that if you start now, a year from now, you have the house. How do you compare material prices now from last year? Stabilized, and a lot of commodities elements have come down quite a bit. Labor is certainly up. But also materials is also like not a monolithic idea. Like certain materials have changed pricing at different times. So if you think about like there's that period 3 years ago where anyone with a cord of wood in the back of their truck was like all of a sudden deemed like wildly wealthy. That sort of chilled out a little bit. And then there was, you know, oil pipeline issues that made a petroleum product really expensive. So paints and plastics and things like that. I would say a lot of the material pricing is sort of stabilized. It's stabilized sort of high, but we're not getting a lot. We're not really getting the thing that was happening a few years ago where you start a project, it has a price point. The contractor would have like a force majeure clause or something that said if there's, meaningful 30% changes in pricing one way or the other, up or down, it always meant up, then we have the right to kind of raise our hand and reestimate. And that was happening on these projects that within months, wood is doubling and metal prices are doubling. None of that's really happening. It's much more stabilized at this point. Okay. Can you please demystify all things financing? What percentage of the all-in cost, land plus prep plus build plus anything else? This is anonymous asking this. Should we have on hand before we reach out to you begin the process? Okay. So I would imagine it depends how you finance stuff. And that's a not great answer, but let's say a very typical financing approach for a new construction project would be that your acquisition costs of the land plus your soft costs, that's huts, doing development, design, organizing the team, getting the lot entitled. Those are out of pocket costs. It's typical people buy their land cash. Don't have to, but it's often they do. Huts as services, design and development services are out of pocket and cannot be financed. And then the entirety of the construction is financed. So let's say, for instance, you want to build a $600,000 house, and that's going to be the build cost. And you buy $100,000 piece of land, and then you hire huts for our services, and it's the collection of things in our sort of dim sum menu engagement is around $50,000. So you'd spend $100,000 on the land out of pocket. You own that outright. You pay Huts $50,000 for our services and entitlement. You take the $100,000 plus $150,000 of value that we've kind of put into the land because it's gone from a raw piece of land into an entitled piece of land. And that is your deposit on your construction loan. That represents your 20 or 25% down out of pocket on the construction loan, and the balance of the project would be financed through a construction loan. Um, so you, in this case, what you would want to have on hand if we were going all the way through the project is 150 grand. That said, there are people who come to us just saying, "Hey, I want to find some land," and start to search around, and they have no intent to buy it yet, but they want to sort of understand what's possible and kind of a couple thousand bucks. But if you're really going all the way through, imagining starting a project, I would account for 25% of the overall project cost, but in land acquisition, 20% land acquisition plus soft costs to have on hand out of pocket to be able to finance and secure financing for your construction loan for the entirety of the project. But you can reach out to us without that. Happy to chat with you anonymous. Jaspreet website has a lot of good info, but it may be helpful to give a bit more of a lay of the land of what services you offer. Just generally, I'm going to hold on that for a second and then come back around to it. But I'm assuming if you're here, you're somewhat aware of what we're up to, but we are a home design and development company focused on rural areas. And so if you're in the market for secondary, primary, or investment properties in rural areas across the United States, and want to design and build a house there and don't really know how to, we're the guys that you tend to come to. Guys and gals that you come to talk to go through a set of steps on acquiring land, improving land, designing a house, putting together the build team, getting entitled, and then building that house. And there's some other kind of layers on top of that, including helping you with securing financing, looking at interior services and other things that kind of go into creating a kind of turnkey outcome. Preston says, I want to add a garage and pool house to my property. How would your team start this project? Can you explain your process in general? Hopefully, what I just said explained some of the process. But for garage and pool house, the first step would be to see your address and understand what is allowed as of right on your property. So the garage and pool house on their own operate a lot like any new construction project. They're going to have their own foundation. It's going to be its own built structure. Ideally, I would think they're going to be close enough to like existing systems, whether you have town or municipal infrastructure or your own septic and well, that we could plug into those for those that are currently servicing the main house. But the most important thing on an outbuilding project is understanding what the town code and zoning allows for. Are you allowed to have outbuildings? Are they allowed to be like a pool house? Is it allowed to have a kitchenette? Can it have a dedicated bedroom? And if would that push it into being called a dwelling, in which case we might call the bedroom something else, and we might like not think about how much of a kitchenette there really is. But I think that the process is very similar to the process of design and construction is very similar to just a small house. The question for you, Preston, is going to be around the local code and zoning in your town or in your county. Anonymous writes, and just so everyone knows, there's a few anonymi here. So I don't know, Anonymous, if I'm asking your questions over and over, or if there's a few people who are anonymous. Anonymous writes, we own the land. Any recommendations on getting a construction loan? Yeah. So one of the best things about owning land outright on a new construction loan is it tends to be that your land is your deposit. That is your collateral on the loan. So if, unlike going to go buy an existing house where you will typically go out and say, hey, want to buy a $500,000 house. The bank will say, sounds great. Give us $100,000, 20% to get to 80% loan to value. We'll finance the 400 grand, and then you'll pay us some closing costs to start that loan. In new construction, it's quite typical that you use the land as your deposit. So you have a $100,000 piece of land, and you're collateralizing that to say that is my 20% down for my $400,000 build cost. The so that's not like a super unique condition. That's actually quite expected in rural areas on new construction that the land is going to be your deposit. Um, and just a recommendation on there's lots of financing approaches, but one that we like a lot is called a single close loan or a 31-year fixed, or construction to perm has a lot of names. But the general idea is that you're getting one loan that is both a construction loan and a traditional 30-year fixed loan in one product. And the way that it would work is that the first year of this 31-year loan would be interest only. And at the completion of construction, the loan would automatically convert into a 30-year fixed mortgage that helps with two things. First, there's only one set of closing costs here rather than two sets of closing costs. You're not closing on both a construction loan and a mortgage. So you're saving thousands and thousands of dollars from that. And then the other is that you are only appraising the project once and doing it upfront. So the bank in this case would be appraising the project based on our designs, and then saying, here's what I think it's going to be worth on the backside. And so we're very good at demonstrating that to banks and our bank partners that it's going to be an equity positive, more valuable project at the end of construction, as opposed to two loans where you get a construction loan, you say, great, I'm going to take out a construction loan for 400 grand. You build a house, and then you say, now it needs to get appraised to get a 30-year fixed. The bank comes out, they send out their appraiser, and they say, oh, the market around here has changed, or we don't like the house that much, or we don't really understand it relative to the comps. And so we only think it's worth 350. So you need to come up with an extra 50 grand in it now. After you're already done, you've already paid 400 for the house. Now, this doesn't happen a lot, but it's a really like it is a thing that can happen, and it's incredibly crummy if it were to. So single close loan solves for a lot of that, and is a quite typical product that we recommend. Anonymous, same anonymous, different anonymous. Writes is all in pricing provided before any other steps begin, e.g., purchase. Y- yes, I think I understand. One of the first things that we do is put together it's called a pro forma for your project. So your all-in pricing on all the soft costs will be provided. So you'll know exactly what our costs are going to be. And then we are sort of designing to your budget. And so if you say, hey, my all-in cost on land and the house needs to be 650 grand, we are sourcing land that fits into that criteria, that requires a level of improvement that fits into that criteria, and then designing the house that fits within that criteria. And that is quite unique because often, and then we're able to do that because of our standards. And again, this is another spot where on YouTube, our webinar series of how we do it, standards kind of goes through the benefits of us knowing the pricing up front from thinking about our homes, not just as kind of like loose floor plans, but really as home products where we understand the material specifications. We know the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC systems. We know the building assemblies. We have kind of catalogs of down market and up market finishes. So we really know the pricing of the house up front. And that allows us to say, cool, if you're going to build a house this size with these sort of modifications and these sort of requirements, here's the house costs. Here's Hutz's costs, and then here's the budget you have available for land. And so that's the way that we're able to get to all-in pricing on the components that go into a land development project of land improvement, soft costs, design development costs, plus construction costs. It's also a thing that as we're going through design, we are constantly reflecting back. We're always looking at, great, here's a design idea, here's the pricing implications of that, which sometimes our clients are surprised how much we are policing their budget, where they might say, hey, yeah, I have this really cool idea, and other sort of design processes that are out there, someone would say, great, let's design it, we'll draw it up and see what happens. In our case, we're saying, really neat idea. That sounds like something that is going to, or we can demonstrate how that is going to blow out the budget that we've defined for you. And either here's an intelligent way for us to approach that either like more cost efficiently, or this doesn't fit. We shouldn't do this. Anonymous asks, I'd like to see and stay in some huts designs before moving forward. Are you seeing many of your clients use their builds as short-term rentals? And is there a place we can find them to book for a night or two? Great question. Some are. So there are a few that are kind of up as active short-term rentals. Um, and yeah, reach out directly. We can kind of put you in touch. Um, and then, just a little bit of a look of what we're thinking about more and more is that this is a common condition that both prospective home builder clients want to stay in Hut's properties or just go on site tours with us, which we do quite a lot on in construction projects. Um, but there's also a whole group that just kind of likes Hut's designs and Hut's approach to homes built and the relationship to nature and our site planning approach, the locations that we have them. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how to bring those two together with our own rental platform. And so that's sort of an initiative coming up not too far down the line where these clients that they've built them for short-term rentals and they really want to have a more targeted audience that they want to chat with, and there's no more targeted audience for a Hut's property than Hut's audience. So we're looking at how to bring these two together. But anonymous, reach out separately and we'll put you in touch with some folks that are renting out Hut's properties. Jaspreet Bakshi, thanks. And how much hands-on involvement is typically involved from clients during the land acquisition permitting process? Not very much, really. I mean, I think that tends to be it tends to be on the polls. There's sort of like there's people who are incredibly excited and have lots of information stored and very well defined and well organized kind of design thinking and they're quite involved in the decision making along the way, and that's great. And then there's a group where it's sort of like, I want a place, I like what you guys do. Can you go kind of push forward on these steps? And both of those are exciting. There are a couple of milestones that we really do need to review together and make sure that we have the green light to keep going. But we tend to, when we design the project up front, we ask that exact question. What kind of involvement do you want to be in, and what parts of this do you want to be engaged in? And then we organize our design and development sequence to match both your availability and interest. Linny asks, what architectural material software to use, and is that shared with clients? Our source models aren't, but we our studio more or less runs entirely off of Revit. And then so all of our site models and 3D models and HVAC systems and material takeoffs, they're all coming out of Revit, and then we're outputting the documentation from there. So we would be providing the documentation, but not necessarily our source Revit models. I live on the East Coast. Are some states easier to work with? That is it easier to acquire land, build, et cetera, in certain areas, regions, et cetera? So I'll put this into like kind of two buckets. The first is called like topographically. What is the setting that's easiest to work with? And so, you know, meadowy lots with a lot of topsoil and clear drainage are always going to be the easiest places to build. That doesn't necessarily make them the most interesting. There's really cool things that start to emerge from a house having a steep slope or there being granite under it or having to put stuff up on piers or whatever it might be. But if you're looking for a quite easy development project, I would say that a meadowy lot with a little bit of slope, clear drainage direction, lots of topsoil, that's going to be the easiest there is. But we like looking at all kinds of parcels. Then the other side is thinking legally around how development friendly or restrictive are certain areas on the East Coast. So it kind of it's a little bit town by town, but there are some interesting statewide regulations. So, for instance, like Vermont has no real building code. And they also have a statewide mandate to allow any lot in any village or anywhere across the state to allow for ADUs because they're looking for to improve housing accessibility. And so there's just like a very pro-development, pro-construction kind of culture that has been legislated in the state, and that trickles down to like, oh, it's kind of easy to get stuff done here. Whereas if you're on Long Island and New York, you're gonna have none of that. You're gonna have design review restrictions. You're gonna have floodplain issues. You're gonna have all kinds of things, and that doesn't mean we don't work there, but it's just not as easy. So the East Coast is a big place with lots of differences, but if you're looking for real ease, you're kind of looking for states and towns that have a little bit of a pro-development mandate. They have limited zoning and zoning review, and pretty open land use kind of regulations. And then the lot type should have like 5 degrees of slope and be meadowy with lots of topsoil, and that's going to work really well for septic and construction and ease of access onto the lot. Anonymous asks, thanks to you go across the US. I thought it was just upstate New York. No, we have projects actively across 14 states right now. I would recommend, um, you know, share my screen. I think looking up where to find some of these answers too on huts.com is helpful. Let me go to the clean browser. So here we are at Huts. So somewhere to check out of our standards, studio with our portfolio to see real and active projects. Our field report is a really great place to check out for everyone there. And somebody just give me the thumbs up to make sure you can see my screen right now. Yeah. So top of the field report, you can see this map. This places all of our active projects. Click into any of these, see where they are, see what the type of project is, see where it stands. So I would definitely check out there. We're not limited to the states where these projects are, but these happen to be kind of like clusters where we get a lot of inquiry. But hey, we love the Midwest, love Colorado, love Wyoming, Florida, all kinds of places. So we're able to work across all 50 states and would love to take on more locations. The other thing here on the field report that I think is cool is to see some of the key stats. We have enough depth of projects now over the past few years that we can really extract trends from these projects on cost of construction, on cost of land improvement, general sizing of the types of projects that we're working on, pricing and square footage pricing on average, the kind of what percentage of the overall cost goes into what category of the project, how does HUT stack up in design development fees, the percentage of construction costs relative to other ways to design and develop a house. So I definitely recommend heading here to a field report in Huts. I think it's a great resource to see locations and projects that we're currently working on and get some of those FAQs of kind of like, what does this stuff cost? How many of these things are you working on? So head over there when you get a chance. Just Freed asks, is there an opportunity to see a completed project close to NYC? Yeah, we have sort of like a driving tour for projects that are street visible. If we're not there, if we are, working together, we start to set up like in-person walkthroughs of actual projects and go through either active construction projects or projects that are kind of right at the end of sort of getting a certificate of occupancy. We tend not to bring people into primary homes unless that's sort of they're up for that, into their personal homes unless they're up for that. But we also have this kind of self-driving tour where you can kind of drive around the Catskills, Hudson Valley, Westchester, kind of see things that are visible from the street and see real live Huts projects. Are we able to procure our own interior finishes? Yes, you can. I went on over this earlier in this call, but it tends to be that we are providing, let's say you have an outside interior designer or you want to kind of procure on your own for whatever reason. We are providing then the inventory of all of the items, the allowances for all of those items to kind of stick within budget as it was defined, and guardrails on what those products can be. And the example I always use is sort of like tile, that you go out and you find this great sort of handcrafted tile, but it's irregular and quite thick. And it's going to be hitting into 3/8 inch wood floor, and then there's a 5/8 inch tile. Now you have a 1/4 inch toe stubbing machine that is going to bust up your toe for the rest of the time you own the house. And so we kind of say, hey, find a 3/8 inch tile to work with here. But yeah, we're happy to kind of meet you where you are with your interest and capability, and desire for interior finish procurement. Anonymous says, does that mean you're able to prevent contractor design overages that might prevent project completion? I've heard horror stories about that. Yeah, I mean, so much of our process is about removing unknowns from the construction process. And I'm, not going to guarantee anything here, but we are significantly de-risking new construction projects on behalf of our client relative to any other way to get this done. And we've seen that kind of time and time again. And it's one of the reasons such a high percentage of the projects that we start design on get to construction, that what we've designed for is actually financially viable. That's one of the big problems that happens in a lot of the architecture and construction trade, is that nobody knows the price of anything during design. And then they say, great, let's go find a contractor to build it. I'm sure the numbers are right. And then, this whole design cost 2 times what I thought it was going to. And nobody ever knew along the way. And so, we are solving for that through our standards quite well, and knowing upfront what a lot of the construction implications are of those design forms. The other thing that we do quite well is bring contractors onto the team early, so that we are arriving at the budget and timeline as a squad rather than being told it at the end, which we have found to a T just doesn't work. And so that is a major driver of our success and kind of adhering to budget and timeline, is that everyone fully understands the scope of the project through the design process. And we're also taking in input sometimes from the contractor around, local guidance, or like, hey, we're using this truss system. You guys have spec'd it from one manufacturer, but I've got this great other guy who's doing it at 60% of the cost. We're open to listening to those local conditions. And then our owner's rep services during construction, where we are defending timeline, defending budget, defending scope, helps a lot with any proliferation of change orders or overages during construction. And so that's interesting, because not only do our clients benefit from that, but we also find that our contractors like that as well. They're getting a little less kind of management requirements on them from the client. There's sort of continuity from our team all the way through the project, and we really understand the parts of it. So the contractor's fielding less questions along from the designer. And that allows a contractor to do what they do really well, which is build, and allows us to do what we do really well, which is ensure the customer experience throughout. What are the biggest barriers to project completion that potential clients should be prepared for? Well, if you get into construction and there's any real risks at that time, the project's all screwed up anyway. I mean, like we're not even getting into construction if it's feeling like anything's foggy. But the number one barrier to completion, or getting over the hump from design to construction, is budget. And that doesn't mean you should have a big budget. It means you should have a design that is appropriate for the budget that you have available. And it's that exact scenario that I was describing before, where people go into like custom home design projects and say, hey, I've got whatever it is, I have a $400,000 budget. And the architect says, yeah, sure, $400,000, and starts designing something. They have no idea what it costs. They may not have any local understanding of that area. They're just drawing stuff and saying, I think it's going to cost this. Then they complete the project. The client loves it. The architect loves it. They might have even permitted it. So the town has said, you can do this. And the client's a little backed into a corner because the project is now entitled, and that's the design it needs to be on the lot. And then they go say, great, we're going to go find someone to build it. and they go out to Mr. Contractor and they reach out to three guys. They get a high bid, a low bid, and a medium bid, and they all come back way higher than they are supposed to. And they're like, I guess the medium one's right, but they're all wrong. Every one of those bids is 50% too high because the contractor has no idea really what the project was because they weren't involved early enough. And the architect really doesn't know what the project is because it's a prototype that they've designed. It's never been created before. And so there ends up being a bunch of reconciliation and sort of value engineering and diluting the project to either fit into the budget or the project gets abandoned. Happens all the time. The reason we exist is to solve for that problem in a lot of ways. So the biggest barrier to project completion is miss misunderstanding or miscommunication or not misadherence to the design intent and the budget and those not working together. And one of the reasons Huts, as both a home designer and a developer, is sort of a unique condition where we care equally about the economics and the economic viability of the project as the aesthetics and the design execution. And so somewhere in the Venn diagram of those is where we live, where tends to be lots of really great projects that, what do you know, also are financially viable along the way and actually get done. Uh, do you have a design and construction package that includes solar power for the house? Not necessarily as a package because state by state solar is so different and how it's sort of administered is quite different. There also really isn't like singular national distributors. They tend to be kind of state companies. But we do have a lot of projects that include both solar arrays, battery power, battery generators, battery walls, and geothermal. And so we take that into consideration all the time on both, here you're going to be thinking about all electric appliances, all electric systems, no combustibles. So our specifications on the interior are going to allow for that. It also becomes a site planning issue, particularly with solar. Like, is it going to be the orientation of the house? If it's going to be roof mounted solar, you need to get great kind of southern light. If you have tree cover, we're going to be thinking about how much tree clearance do we need to do to open up enough solar incidents there. If it's going to be a ground mounted system, we need to think about around what the placement of that is. How visible is it? How not visible is it? So we don't have a go-to manufacturer or go-to installer, but when we're going through site planning, orientation, and I would say mechanical, electrical, plumbing specifications, we're thinking a lot around what the systems are and how they're going to work both with natural conditions and orientation and with the mechanicals and appliances that are spec'd inside of the house. So long way of saying that's not like an off-the-shelf package, but we know how to consider these things quite well. Lenny writes, how do you sign up for a site tour? That's an interesting thing. We haven't really done that where it's like, hey, everyone out there who's interested in seeing a medium bar, on this day, we're gonna get together. Let's say you're in the New York area and see two examples of that live. But I think we are going to plan for something like that. That sounds really cool, Lenny. The way that tends to happen is either through self-driving tours where we say, here's a bunch of addresses and you can go by along with some recommendations for like some coffee spots and lunch spots along the way. Or we're kind of working with somebody actively and they have a house type that or a lot that's sort of similar to another project we're working on, and we might take them to it and say, let's walk through and see this live. So as we're designing your house and working through your ideas, you can visualize that not just through plan or through 3D model, but we'll just go into the space and see how does this feel to you. But I like this idea a lot of having a scheduled tour where we say, hey, we're opening this up to 20 people or so to say, join me or somebody else from my team to walk through some projects. If that sounds like a good idea, I think that got a decent amount of people here. Throw up a thumbs up somewhere, either in the chat or Q&A. And if a few people say that, we'll start working on something like that. In addition to your land listings, can Huts find a piece of land that meets my desires that we share with you in an initial consultation? Yeah, sure. We have kind of two things that we can do, either a land consultation or land discovery and sourcing. Land consultation means you're bringing lots to us, and we are evaluating them for suitability for development and how well they fit with our kind of project sequence. And um, and we will kind of assess them on all sorts of terms, like um, the main one being the difficulty of developing the lot. Is this place that, hey, people will come to us and say, hey, I found this great lot, so cheap, got it for 20 grand and it's been in the market for 800 days. But I think it's a steal. And then we look at it and it's like, well, you got some issues here. You have to cross wetlands. So now you have Army Corps of Engineers building a bridge. You've got endangered frogs on the lot. So now DEP is involved and the federal government is involved. You've got zoning restrictions where the place is zoned as light industrial, so we'd have to have a change of use. And so there's a reason the lot was so cheap, because it comes with all these complexities to get it into something that you can use. That's an extreme example, but we do like to evaluate. Lots of people bring us, and that would be the kinds of thinking we would do. And then on the other side is we're taking in your criteria and we're thinking about what the overall project cost is, what the sort of like what type of region you want to be in, what's the sort of relationship to a town. We're thinking a little bit around like the cultural nuance of where you're thinking about to move in, thinking about the economics of the lot relative to the rest of the project. And then we're coming with our short list of here's the place we think really fit quite well. And usually even beyond that, saying, here's our recommendation. We think you should move forward with this one. Because we think it fits all of these marks. And so those are kind of two ways of engaging with us early on sourcing land. Similarly, there is a how we do it land sourcing on YouTube. So please head over there to see the full 45-minute scree on this topic. Do you provide indicative all impression? Any thoughts on prefab? Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on prefab. So prefab is not like a super descriptive term. There's really, I would say, two categories of thinking about prefab. One is modular and one is sort of prefabrication or panelization. A lot of people, when they think of prefab, when they say prefab, they are thinking of modular, which is like a completed house or big chunks of a house rolling down the road, finished on the interior on a double wide trailer, getting set down, and then kind of plugged into infrastructure. I am not super bullish on fully modular for a lot of types of housing. I think it can work for ADUs, maybe. I think the costs, there don't tend to be many cost benefits there unless it's really high volume. And I haven't seen a company that is doing really high volume modular construction, the kind where you get real economies of scale, unless it's like single wide trailers. So there's interesting startups out there that are looking at ADUs and other kind of vertically integrated fabrication methods. They just haven't hit enough scale for the cost of site built or stick built to be to beat the cost of site built generally. For fully modular. The other problem with some of the fully modular stuff is permitting. So if you think about some of these rural areas, you'll have a permit office or a town inspector who he's like the guy. There's like one guy that's going to be looking at this. Your fate is in his hands to review the project. And he's coming to kind of inspect the project at key moments, checking out the excavation, checking out foundation, checking out framing, checking out mechanical, electrical, plumbing, rough-in, and wants to see certain things along the way. Now, imagine you kind of roll into this guy's town with a fully modular building that has drywall in and all the electrical is done and all the plumbing is in. And he says, great, now I want to see the electrical. It's behind drywall. It's done. It's going to be a big problem of either ripping apart the house or not being able to get it permitted at all. And there's also a different process of permitting those projects. They are permitted by it's a national body for modular construction, and that national body is writing a letter to the local town inspector, and the local town inspector might say, I don't I don't honor this. I don't care what this is. And so I I like the promise of a fully vertically integrated housing manufacturing process. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that it works at scale and or in lots of different areas. On the other side, there's panelization, which I do like a lot, which is kind of pre-assembling either SIPS panels or pre-assembled wall systems and floor and roof systems. And here, the process is a little different, where you're still taking advantage of local trades, local mechanical, electrical, plumbing folks, and local concrete for foundations and site conditions. But the shell of the house is getting built offsite in big chunks and then brought in, and then there's a shell of a house very quickly. Now that solves for a lot of things. It both reduces a lot of the potential labor costs and framing time on site. It pulls a part of the construction scope out of the general contractor's hands, and by extension, removes the amount of profit and overhead that's being kind of made on top of the framing. But it also moves the project indoors more quickly. And so if you're in the really a lot of the country, but Northeast, Pacific Northwest, anywhere across the Midwest, um, your construction is an outdoor sport, and the earlier you can bring it indoors, the more control you gain. And so I think that modularity helps with, or sorry, panelization helps with a lot of that. And then the other place we look a lot at panelization is some of these like remote islands and places that are hard to get to. That the idea of going back and forth on a ferry or up and back on a long mountain pass with large kind of lumber orders, just kind of loose materials, is both going to add up in time and expense pretty quickly. And so if we can kind of get all of the shell materials to the house or to the build site sort of right away and then stand up the shell of the house over a few days rather than going back and forth on a ferry or mountain pass road over weeks, that's going to help the construction timeline. That's going to move the project indoors more quickly. And you have to think about on construction time, time really is money that you are paying interest during the period of construction. So the tighter you can remove weeks, the more you're going to be removing interest payments from your construction loan. Those are a lot of thoughts. I have more of them. If maybe someday we'll do a dedicated topic just on this. You have a catalog of fixtures you offer for your standard designs that we could look at. Flooring, tile, lighting, trying to understand if your vision would require custom fixtures versus what's offered within standards. Yeah, we have a standards catalog that we look at. We tend so usually we're sort of looking through that with clients, and it kind of falls into six categories. Light and airy, dark and rich, and then upmarket, standard, and kind of down market within each, or sort of value based. We reach out to us directly, and we'll chat around how to take a look at that. I would also urge you to check out our how we do it interiors, finishes, and fixtures selections on YouTube. Thoughts on hempcrete? I think hempcrete's really interesting. The I think any of these sort of like stuffed panels are pretty fascinating. We're working on a project right now that if you go to our portfolio, it's called the Straw House. And the reason it's called the Straw House is because rather than a hempcrete panel, it's actually straw filled. It's a European product where fully panelized construction, we basically rationalized our medium bar design into these straw panels. The client had this great contact and real desire to pursue pretty strict adherence to passive principles, and one of those was utilizing this straw-filled insulation system, which required all kinds of sort of modifications, not a lot of modification to the shell of the house, but thinking about kind of conduit systems and electrical and how we're running stuff through these straw panels. But that is a project where we just finalized CDs. We're going to get permits shortly, and then we'll start construction. And so, Anonymous, if you're interested in hempcrete, this is almost like a couple steps past that, and we'll definitely be documenting that project along the way. A lot of thumbs up here for dedicated site visit day. I love it. That sounds really cool. I think we'll get to work on creating something like that. Um, what do you need as far as documentation if you have land to be evaluated? Not much, really, just the lot ID or lot address. Almost everything else we can pull ourselves. We have a lot of, we've have land subscription business, we have the land report. We are helping people sourcing to source land. I think that we've evaluated a few thousand plots of land. And we have a lot of like kind of tips and tricks to understand what the opportunity of the parcel is. So we don't really need very much. We would basically just engage for that consultation, and you would provide us the lot ID or the address, and give us a week to take a look at it and come back and tell you our thoughts. Um, Linny, great. You're talking with someone on our team about a lot on our land report. Fantastic. I'm excited to hear more about your project, and we know that lot well. And it sounds like what you're looking to do, just looking at your questions here, are a really excellent fit for our design development approach, and we're excited to work with you too. We're getting to the top of the hour, and I think maybe kind of hit the end of what we can answer here, but I will give it one more. Going once, going twice, going three times. If there aren't any more questions, then we'll record this. And if for anyone out there who's watching this later or thinking about this now, I think we'll keep running some of these open Q&As, ask me anything, office hours, whatever we want to call it, kind of sessions. And like I said, it's great for us. The types of questions that we receive, we want to make sure that we are answering them once very well, rather than sort of piecemeal like this. So starting to see trends of questions that tell us there should be sort of a dedicated piece of content or collateral or video specifically about that thing. But one of the most exciting bits of takeaway is that you guys have signed us up and me up for a field trip to meet a lot of you at a site, and we will organize an in-person review of some projects for exactly that. Thank you everyone for joining, and look out for this on our YouTube channel at Huts NYC soon, and keep following along. Thank you.